Why is zero-based budgeting not just some buzzword, and how would you make it work in the state of Wyoming specifically?
Well, I'm the candidate that's talking about zero-based budgeting, and I believe that we need to implement that in Wyoming. Many states have implemented zero-based budgeting, as have a number of the businesses in the private sector. Zero-based budgeting is simply what you and I do in our private budgeting every year. And that is, we go through from ground zero and determine and reprioritize each year what we can afford and what we can't, and what programs work and what programs don't. There is very little, if any, incentive at all in state government right now to save, frankly, because you start with your budget of what you ended up with last biennium. That's the starting point. There is no incentive, there is very little incentive to go back and examine the programs and reprioritize and to examine whether they're necessary or not. Zero-based budgeting has been around for a long time. It actually started with Jimmy Carter. It had some bumps, it hasn't always been perfect. Ronald Reagan used it. There are a number of states that use it, and Wyoming needs to implement it in this state.
Matt, need 60 seconds.
When I was U.S. Attorney, I was head of a four-state group that worked on drug issues, and we had zero-based budgeting for that program. But it was much smaller, and I think zero-based budgeting on a year-to-year basis is not workable in the state of Wyoming, because putting together a budget and starting from scratch each biennium would be extremely difficult. I think for zero-based budgeting to work, it has to be on a rotational basis, every third biennium, every fourth biennium. It's a healthy process to look from scratch and see whether or not you're meeting your needs, number one, and number two, whether you have the money you need or you have too much money. But to do it every year, I think is going to be more cumbersome and in the end actually more costly for each agency to start with zero-based budgeting.
Colin Simpson, a minute.
Thank you, Bob. I do not agree with zero-based budgeting on an annual basis. I think it creates a huge bureaucracy unto itself and is unnecessary. I have proposed something in the middle of what Ron and Matt are talking about, and I did that in April, which is the Sunset Advisory Commission, where we have executive branch people, legislators, private citizens, and business people who are on this commission and look at every agency once every 7 or 8 years on a rotating basis. Is it doing what it was intended to do? Does it need to be modified or changed? And how does it need to be changed? And what are the rules and regulations that go with it? Is it necessary? Is it unnecessary? That's the way to do it. It's called the Sunset Advisory Commission. State employees do have incentives to cut. They cut 10% out of most of their budgets this last biennium. And that was at the request of the governor and with the acknowledgement of the legislature. I talk to state employees who were agency heads, and they tell me they are efficient and they do what they can to save money, and I believe them. And the legislature will continue to review that along with the executive branch.
Tom, you've been 60 seconds.
Zero-based budgeting, I don't agree with either. I think what we need to do is each year take a look at our programs and see what we can do better on each one and go about that way. Thank you.
Rita Meyer, 60 seconds.
I have done zero-based budgeting when I was a comptroller in the Air National Guard. It worked there. Our budget structure is a little different in state government. What you're really trying to do is ferret out spending that's no longer necessary, and there are a lot of different ways to do that. And one of the things that I have been a strong proponent of is more program audits in the state. So we can look back and say, gee, we started that program 5 years ago. Is that a program that still hits the mark? Is it still efficient? Is it effective? Do we need it? And I think more program audits would be the answer to ferreting out inefficiencies with regards to spending. It could be done if the legislature so desires and we move in that direction. It would have to be done in a rolling type basis, because you certainly could not handle that entire big budget doing zero-based budgeting every biennium for every agency.
Ron Michael, I have 30 seconds.
Well, I've been around long enough that I was in the legislature when we actually passed sunset legislation. I was on one of the first sunset committees that we had. It was back in the late 70s, early 80s. And the fact is that sunset legislation didn't work. And we now call it performance audit reports, because we did not sunset any government agency or any programs. The truth is that there are bigger corporations in the state of Wyoming that are using performance-based budgeting, and they're using it effectively. And we can do it in the state of Wyoming. And it's going to take some bumps, we're going to learn, but we can do it.